Hey, this is Mark Fitzpatrick, Tiger Club of Kansas City. It is Tuesday, March 26th, our final meeting of this fiscal year, and our guest, Brendon Steenbergen, came up from Columbia. He is an author of a book, Respectable Roughnecks, about the 1960 Mizzou Tiger team, which we think laid claim to a national championship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Brendon, you're a young man by our standards. Obviously, you weren't around then. What inspired you to write this?
Well, I think, Missouri's got a proud football program history, and a lot of people don't know about it, including myself when I started doing the research, which goes back almost a decade when Missouri was joining the SEC. And, you hear about all these great programs in the SEC, and certainly a lot of those programs didn't know about Mizzou's history, and I felt like I didn't know enough about it. And so I started looking up these great teams of the past, and I see one that was undefeated, but they weren't named national champions, and I wanted to know why, and I started doing a little digging, and these great stories pop up, and you think, well, some people need to hear about this, right. And so that got me inspired to write the book.
How long did you work on this project?
Well, so I started at probably 2014, so almost 10 years in the making. I interviewed a lot of guys who, frankly, sadly aren't with us anymore, but there was so much research and so much went into it that it took a long, long time, and then I finally got everything compiled together, and I couldn't wait to get it out. So yeah, it took a long time. If I write another one, I'm going to try to make it a little shorter.
So that team, they're undefeated. They come off a huge win against Oklahoma. They come back to play Kansas the next week. Kansas defeats Mizzou, ruining their #1 ranking. But later, they determined they had an ineligible player. I guess they knew going in that. So were you able to talk to some of the people in charge there on what happened? I think you even talked to Bert Cohn, the ineligible player.
I did talk to Bert Cohn, the Kansas player who was the big controversial
player. Who later
player.
played for the Kansas City Chiefs.
He did, yeah. A great guy, really nice. Yes, he said that he'd been recruited by Bud Adams. He'd taken this trip to Chicago for the college all-star games, which at the time teams weren't allowed to take off-campus trips, especially if they were already on another team, and he played for TCU at the time. So the NCAA put these infractions on him that they couldn't go to a bowl game, couldn't have televised games. And the Big Eight later told them that they should probably not play Bert Cohn because of the controversy surrounding him. So Kansas, they did play them, and so there was a dispute at the conference level on who the winner of those last two matchups, Colorado, Kansas, and Missouri, should be. And the Big Eight ruled that Kansas should forfeit those games. There's a discrepancy at the NCAA level where Kansas certainly claims those wins and Missouri claims those wins.
Right.
65 years later, they're still fighting about it.
After that, Tigers go to the Orange Bowl. They meet the Heisman Trophy winner, Joe Bellino, and he has probably the worst game of his life that day.
Yeah, and I would say that it wasn't Joe Bellino's doing he had the worst game of his life. It was Missouri's wonderful defense that caused that. Negative rushing yards for the day for a guy who was unstoppable in the regular season and was, like everybody thought he was the Heisman Trophy winner. He had no problem winning that award. He had such a wonderful season. Missouri put him to a complete stop and had an incredibly impressive victory over the midshipmen in that Orange Bowl, and really, I think, solidified the real reason, forfeit or not against Kansas, that Missouri had the national championship team that year in 1960.
Another part of the book I want to ask you about is the social situations of the time. And we had Norris Stevenson and Mel West. They were the first two African Americans to play for Mizzou. There was a lot more going on than just the talent team. It was being the civil rights movement. You touch on that in the book.
Yeah, so Norris Stevenson's first black player, Mel West, the unheralded title of the second black player. They were in the same year, and they were seniors that season. Mel West came a semester after Norris. But yeah, they had some trouble in restaurants locally in Columbia, I know, getting served. They had a lot of trouble, like when they go down to Texas A&M. Mayor Bryant coached the Texas A&M team that year in 1959. And several times in a hotel in the Orange Bowl down in Miami, and at the country club when they had the reception following the Orange Bowl. It was the beginning of the civil rights movement. There was a lot of segregation and racism going on, and Norris Stevenson and Mel West said, here's the thing about that is every team, every program has their own Jackie Robinson.
Right.
And they don't all get the sort of acclaim that Jackie Robinson did, but Norris Stevenson was ours at Mizzou, and he had to fight those same battles, and he handled it with grace and was a team leader and a legend.
How many of the old players on that roster approximately were you able to talk to in doing this book?
Well, it's a good question. I spoke, some of them were more involved in the season than others. So a lot of the sophomores maybe didn't get as much playing time as the seniors. But I spoke to, a lot of them. I bet I've got 20 interviews recorded from players. And I say 20, you think of how big football teams are. They weren't that big in 1960 because the guys played both ways. And so, the teams were half that size. And by the 2015, these guys were in their mid-70s, or some of them weren't with us anymore.
Right.
So I talked to as many as I could get a hold of and that were still around.
Last question, which one of those stood out of the interviews that you did stood out the most?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of them stood out for different reasons. There's some great stories. Danny LaRose, he was the All-American that year, the consensus All-American. But one of the things that stood out was his just real memory, game by game, of each one that went on. Some of the guys would be like, gosh, that was a long time ago. I can't remember. They all blurred together. Danny LaRose remembered every trip, every road trip, every game. And then Norm Beal stood out to me because he was just a funny guy, and told funny stories and was bawdy and kind of he swore like a sailor, And so those guys, their personalities really came through in those interviews, and I think that helped the book.
I can't wait to read it. I'm so nice of you to come up here. Glad you're here. We can get it on Amazon.
Yep.
Where else?
Well, it's in Columbia bookstores mainly. Probably Amazon is the best way if you're outside of the Columbia area.
Okay.
But I'm working to get it out more broadly in brick and mortar stores. It's coming out in paperback at the end of March.
Okay.
So you can get it on ebook, paperback, hardcover, and then audiobook.
Okay. Brendon Steenbergen. The book is Steenbergen. I'm sorry.
No problem.
The book is Respectable Roughnecks. It's about the 1960 Mizzou football team, arguably the best team in Mizzou history that we think was a national champion.
Absolutely.
Right? And one of the polls declared that.
That's right. The polling system declared them. They were an NCAA selector.
So we're going to say they are.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Hey, folks, this is our last meeting of the year. We will have our golf tournament June 24th at Loch Lloyd. It is filling up fast, so go to our website, kctigerclub.com, and get registered as soon as you can. We're also looking for sponsors. It was a great event last year. Promises to be even better this year. And don't forget information on future meetings. Go to kctigerclub.com, and we will see you in the fall.